Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. Angola's long-serving president, Eduardo dos Santos, and his party, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, have enjoyed another victory at the polls. Although not quite the 82% landslide of 2008, with 97% of ballots counted so far, they have scored more than 70% and will retain an absolute parliamentary majority, leaving opposition parties lagging far behind. But with victory also comes new responsibilities, and to help us unpack the impact of the latest election results is Professor Gilbert Gadiagala, who heads up the School for International Affairs at Wits University and SADC editor of the Southern Africa Report, Vugani Mde. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. No surprises, the MPLA professor has dominated the Angolan political scene for over 30 years. Was this a credible poll?
There have been doubts about whether that was actually a credible poll. And I think the way to judge elections is not on elections day, it's to judge the elections as a process. And there have been complaints about voter registration rolls not being open. There have been complaints about government actually doing the voter registration itself, not the Electoral Commission. And the opposition has actually been complaining about a wide range of grievances. So one did expect that the MPLA actually would win, but there is some cloud on that victory, and I think that's the big issue now.
Of course, the second largest party in Angola is UNITA. They have done reasonably well despite the irregularities, Vugani. Is this an indication that the MPLA is finally losing its grip on power, albeit a very slow process?
I would say that UNITA has actually done better than reasonably well. Indications have been for the past couple of years at least that UNITA has been in decline and has been losing electoral support. In fact, UNITA had a bit of a mini crisis going into the elections where the president resigned and formed a new party, or rather a new coalition, which has actually itself done well and has emerged as the third largest party in parliament. UNITA has also had massive financial disadvantages, obviously in relation to the MPLA, but also in absolute terms, UNITA's money supply has been drying up for years now. So for them to actually double their electoral support was a very good achievement for them. It is, in a sense, an indication that Angolan voters are increasingly disenchanted with the MPLA. But it is also, first and foremost, an indication of the reduced voter turnout. Because a higher voter turnout, and indications now are that up to 60% of voters turned up, which is relatively low for a Southern African election. A higher turnout would probably have favored the ruling party.
Professor, do you share this view?
I think on the voter turnout, the disappointing element is that you have a 40% lack of voter turnout, and I think that's a problem. I think you're right that for Southern Africa it's a problem because you're having elections that have higher voter turnouts than 40%. So it's problematic. But again, given Angola's history, UNITA is done very well this time. It's a good demonstration that, in fact, if you have an open political process, the opposition may make some gains. But I think the bigger issue in Angola is that you need very transparent political processes in order for the opposition actually to make any headway. The MPLA still is the dominant party. It controls all levers of government. And therefore, the more they control, the harder it is for actually opposition parties to make any real headway. And we'll see what is going to come down in the next 5 years. Because, again, we need a very good succession plan. Mr. Dos Santos has been in power for almost 33 years. And that's a very long time even by Southern African standards, by African standards, in fact, in absolute sense.
In fact, Professor, one could argue that the fact that Dos Santos remains in power is out of step with, the kind of renaissance that Africa is undergoing and this democratization project that is, going on in the continent. And yet, of course, the fact that he has this parliamentary majority gives the MPLA the right to give him another 5 years, in office. Do you actually think that he's going to serve that 5 years, or do you think the MPLA is internally trying to facilitate a takeover or a handover of sorts?
I believe this is he's going to serve his entire term. And I think there have been debates over the last 1.5 years about a successor to Dos Santos. So those debates are very, very important in, I think, preparing the nation for Mr. Dos Santos' exit. So I think this is going to be his final term. I don't see him running for another term, although I mean he'll be 75 by the time we get to the next elections. But I also think that for his legacy, I don't think he wants to prolong his rule in power. And it's important for the country actually to move ahead. And given that the MPLA is the dominant party, you need a very good succession plan within the party itself for the country actually to be stable. So that is important for his legacy, to not prolong his stay in power.
Vugani, the MPLA, of course, has been struggling internally, albeit, in a very closed process, with trying to figure out who is going to be the successor. We've had some names bandied about as potential successors for Dos Santos. Take us through who in the party, given that so very little is known about the top echelons of the MPLA, who in the party are potential leaders that can take over from Mr. Dos Santos?
Well, actually, just before I get to that, I'd like to disagree with the professor on this point. Although, of course, it's a difference of opinion rather than fact. I have my doubts whether or not President Dos Santos is actually going to finish this current term. As the professor indicated, there has been talk in the MPLA for a couple of years now. There's actually been more than talk. There's been succession planning. And until earlier this year, the party seems to have decided, or rather it was late last year when they held a special congress where they decided that they would hold their fire on naming a successor for Dos Santos, and they would allow the president to lead Angola into the next election. That has a lot to do with internal politics in the MPLA, but also perhaps a sense within the MPLA that this is not the correct historical moment. Angola is it's a large and growing economy, but it is an unstable society, and increasingly so as the differences between rich and poor become a lot more pronounced. And so there's been a feeling in the MPLA that let's hold off on naming and installing a successor.
Manage change.
And manage the change gradually. But I think, and this is opinion rather than, and I don't know this from fact, that it might be that President Dos Santos will step down at some point during his this current term, and have a successor lead Angola for a couple of years, and then take the MPLA to the next election. My view on who that successor is governed mainly by what we at Southern Africa Report have been getting out of Angola, and the sense that we get is that the chosen candidate is Manuel Vicente, who was for about 13 or 14 years the leader and CEO of Angola's state oil utility, Sonangol. Earlier this year, he was named the Minister of State for Economic Planning and Coordination. It's a very powerful post. It's a new post that was created specifically for a person of his unique set of skills and responsibilities. I get the sense that post is a parking space for Mr. Vicente, but also to introduce him to the everyday workings of the state, because he's never been in government, in order to prepare him for the eventuality of taking over the MPLA and leading the MPLA in Angola.
Professor, Vincente's name has popped up. Some commentators have said that this is a mere front, that Dos Santos is never going to hand over power. He's going to serve out his full term. There has, of course, also been the threat of potential, international pressure on some sort of an arrest of Dos Santos, and there's a lot of worry within the upper echelons of the MPLA to manage this process so that it shields Dos Santos as he exits from power from potential prosecution when he steps down. Do you think Vicente is the natural successor to President Dos Santos?
I think given his role at Sonangol, he's technically somebody who could, I think, preserve the interests of the ruling class, if we could put it that way. And I think that's why he's a most attractive candidate, because he's very much status quo, very much linked to the Dos Santos family, and he would be maybe somebody they could easily, the family could easily sell as a candidate of continuity, rather than a candidate of change. And maybe that's not what the MPLA wants at this point. They want somebody who will take over from Dos Santos and maintain that legacy. I don't think there is any pressure externally on Dos Santos, on what you are suggesting about prosecution and so on. I think it's much more how the MPLA is going to actually manage the succession from Dos Santos without rocking the boat. And the boat being, power, especially economic power, is centralized within very few hands in Angola. Mm-hmm. And therefore you need a party that accepts that or buys into a candidate that is a candidate, a status quo candidate. And then hopefully, if you have a new phase also at the party, you're also hoping that the people can buy into that candidate. But you see, the constitution that was changed a few years ago allows the leading party, in fact, to choose the president. So there is really no threat on the candidate, whoever is chosen. I think the people will still accept him because these elections have already decided that the leading party is going to choose the presidential candidate. So the succession has to be managed amicably within the party. I think that's the bigger issue. The issue is whether there are going to be dissident voices within MPLA who don't want this anointed candidate. And I don't know whether that's going to occur, but that would be the major threat, I think, to the stability of the party and ultimately to the stability of the entire country.
Mm-hmm. Vugani, the MPLA is obviously a very centralist party with a vanguard approach to politics, to leadership. How stable is the MPLA and how managed can this transition to a new leadership actually be?
Well, like all ruling parties, the MPLA has often quite there's contestation internally for power and people positioning themselves to be in line for the next change in leadership. But the MPLA is remarkably resilient and stable, given that it leads the government of Africa's second largest oil producer, and therefore there is a lot at stake. The MPLA in very many ways reminds you of the ANC in terms of its internal wrangles, but its ability, its proven ability to come through its internal leadership dynamics and re-emerge, as this election has shown, stronger or as strong as it was before. So I think the MPLA will manage the Dos Santos succession. It's only a matter of I suspect that following this election, you are going to start to see signs of changes happening. The MPLA needed to get itself and Angola through this next phase.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to take a short break, but when we come back, we continue our conversation unpacking the election results in Africa's second largest oil-producing country.